Aloha Mai Kako. Thank you very much, JB, for setting this up and getting it all set. I want to thank Don, first of all, because I was kind of overcommitted, and I said to Don, you have a show on architecture in Honolulu. And of course, he had a very long show on architecture in Honolulu, so this is cut down quite a lot to 60 slides for 120. And he actually has even more than 120. So I want to thank Don, especially our sensei and all of this stuff, so thanks, Don. And so here we have our first slide. It's going to take us sort of from the very early settlement of Honolulu through some major buildings. We're going to miss some of your favorites, I'm sure, but I'll try to go over this. I had to give another presentation this morning, so I'm feeling kind of presented out, but this is the Port of Honolulu. When they still hadn't decided yet whether it was going to be an L or an R sound, by Louis Koris, and he was a German and Russian. He had an artist. He was on the Rurik expedition, so this picture was published in 1822, but drawn around 1816. So this was the famous German, Russian-American expedition. And you can see the very traditional house forms. As you see, they're much more triangular looking, more not the way we kind of come to think of Halepili or Hale Noa. So anyone who's been watching the TV show, Chief of War, will notice that they're quite accurate with their houses. And the Katyana is sleeping in what really looks almost like a large pup tent. It's not very big at all. And that was probably typical of a lot of the housing at the time. So the one we're most familiar with, the only one we can actually, authentic building we can go visit, is at the Fisher Museum. This was put there in 1902. It's a late 19th century house taken from a compound in Kauai. It was, it's more than one building were put together to actually make this happen. William Bingham, who was the curator at the Bishop Museum at the time, had this vision, and it got constructed right there in Hawaii Hall, which had just been finished, built in 1901. And as you know, about 10, I think it was 10 years ago, maybe more now, it was completely recovered again and thatching and restored. Quite a big expense, but it's still, I think, a high point of visiting. By the time of the First World War, there were really no grass houses left in Hawaii to speak of. Once in a while, one would show up. If you look at newspaper articles, you'll see they were building a rail in Hamakua, and they'll say, "Oh, we found the remnant of a Hawaii grass house." But there are very few, and it is obviously not continued on as our basic vernacular. So they evolved. The Hawaiians saw different house types of Europeans. They thought some of these ideas are pretty good. They like windows. Oftentimes they placed the windows down at the ground level because that's where they were sleeping, and they would, if they got a double hung type window or two sashes, they would put them sideways, and so they would get more breeze. They made the doors a little bigger and made the walls more perpendicular. And the one at the top, I was just joking with Don, it still has the watermark on it from barely. Can you see it? I could, but I was looking at it on my computer. Good thing. That one is even more Europeanized with an attached lanai. Lanais used to be more or less freestanding. So this is the mission houses. We all know this. A lot of people say it's the first wooden house. It isn't the first wooden house in Honolulu, but it's the only one that's still around from that early period. In fact, some of the siding and stuff was taken from other buildings that had been collected in the town as almost like architectural, what do you call it, salvage. And it was built with a basement famously, which was something that the builder Hiram Bingham was familiar with. It was brought around the horn in pieces, but it wasn't like in the movie of Hawaii where the whole thing is just lifted off with a crane. It was quite a different thing. They basically had the framing, so the framing was brought over. And then if you even look now on the interior, you'll see the secondary members are more local, like Ohia Vows and things like that. And then they had to purchase some of the siding at the time it was set up. And so the siding would be consistent. But probably the windows came over in complete and obviously the frame. We all know Quai Hao Church, National Historic Landmark, one of the earliest ones in Hawaii, 1962. Hiram Bingham was the architect. There had been several Quai Hao churches of more perishable material, but this one was finally constructed between 1836 and 1842. Supposedly there are 14,000 coral blocks. They mined the coral right off the reef there, and in fact this was much closer to the water now than it is because of all the later fill land. Let's see, so it was called, it was probably based a bit on the King's Chapel in Boston, which was Peter Harrison, mid-18th century, but probably on Asher Benjamin's building books that were something that obviously Bingham had in his memory, so that he could kind of think about that when he came up with that facade design. The photo is by Hugo Stangenwald in 1857. Let's see. This is another Stangenwald photo from Quai Hao Church. So he's looking out over the landscape of Honolulu. This is basically a Queen Street view from between 1856 and 1858. Ahu's house is in the foreground, and to the sort of tower building is the Oahu Charity School. You notice there are fences everywhere, and again at this point the fences weren't just to define property lines, but actually to keep roaming animals out of people's yards. In fact, Hawaiians who lived in Honolulu covered their grass houses with mud to try to prevent cattle from chewing on it. So that was something that was quite common at the time. We all think we know the Iolani Palace, but this was the royal residence as of 1844. This was Kamehameha III's palace. He purchased it from another ali'i. It was made of coral block. It would be originally called Hale Ali'i, and then later started to be called Iolani Palace. It was demolished in 1874 in time to build the new Iolani Palace, which was slightly diamond head of this site. Other people had nice houses like this. This is Charles Reed Bishop and Beatrice Pawa'i Bishop's house right on Bishop Street, about where the Starbucks is today. A lot of people say this is sort of southern, maybe it looks colonial, they try to give it a style. I've always argued that in this early period, this was very cosmopolitan. So if you go to Singapore, you go even to Bangkok, or you go to Hong Kong, you see similar buildings. So they were part of a trading network that touched on places in the East. And this is very much in that flavor. Typically there would be masonry on the ground floor and wood up above, and then had columns above columns. The same with Washington Place. Washington Place was built by a builder named Isaac Hart. He apparently found the clay on site and burned the clay and made it into bricks on site, built in 1847 for John Dominus. John Dominus never actually got to occupy it. He died sometime around 1846, but he leaving his wife a widow. She would make it a rooming house. Anthony Dyke, who was a American consul in Honolulu, ended up calling it Washington Place in 1848. And as you know, John Dominus's son, John Owen Dominus, would marry Queen Liliuokalani And that's how it ended up becoming her residence after the overthrow. This is an interesting house. This is an early affluent Chinese person named Chung Afong, and he was able to build a house and bring a little bit of the flavor of Chinese architecture into his design. Very similar design as the old City Hall, the Honolulu Hale. Next to what is still the Kamehameha V Post Office, sometimes referred to as Honolulu House. It would last until around the 1920s when it was just taken down because they were building a new City Hall, the new Honolulu Hale. So now it's, since 1950, it's been a parking lot there, kind of a decorated park now. So Queen Street view, combined wood masonry buildings. The McKee Anton building is the one closest to you with the kind of curved corner and the kind of elaborate, possibly even cast iron front. But this was a kind of a typical late federal style building in the back east if you were to go to New York or Boston. And this is 3 stories high and for a long time the tallest building. All right, the old courthouse. That's a very interesting story. It was built on the palace of Kamehameha II. It had possibly some sort of connection with being a Haunau in Pu'uhonua rather, in Honolulu. So it seemed kind of fitting that you would end up having a courthouse on the same site next to the fort. And the fort, of course, was is that in the foreground of this picture? Yeah, so it's being demolished in 1857. So the old courthouse would survive until 1968. In fact, the builders of the Topa Financial Plaza put out an ad, would anybody like this building? It was made out of coral block. It was used by Hackfeld and Company as a kind of warehouse for many years. Very important to the history of Hawaii because it was also the Parliament building, and this is where Kalakaua had to escape through the upper windows after the riots following the election with Queen Emma. So interesting. So this is hard to recognize. So this is the Melchers building down on Merchant Street. This is what it originally looked like. It was only 4 bays, 3 or 4 depending on if you're looking upstairs or down. Made out of coral block again, very much in the spirit of neoclassicism of the federal period in which it was, late federal period in which it was built, 1854. They're all very fond of the Kamehameha V Post Office, 1871. J.G. Osborne was an Englishman, came here via Australia. This would end up being the inspiration for the Ali'iolani Hale, which was built a few years later. You can see he used an innovative construction technique, which was precast concrete block that looked like rusticated stone, and it would be the same technique used at Ali'iolani Hale later. Had 1,000 post office boxes, and I think they were divided by Haole Hawaiian and Chinese. So they had some level of discrimination back in the old days as well. So this became known as the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. It's on the site of HISAM now, the Hawaii State Art Museum, which was before that the United Services YMCA, which was built after the First World War. But this became known as originally the Hawaiian Hotel. The government had a part in getting it started, and then became known as the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. This was built in 1871, opened in 1872 to great fanfare, torn down in 1917, right after just about the time we entered the war. Ali'iolani Hale was originally going to be a palace, but then became the seat of government. And again, it follows the style of the King Kamehameha V Post Office. Thomas Rowe, another British architect who came via Australia. The Kamehameha V laid the cornerstone in 1871. It would end up being a building of great importance. It was basically served as all government functions. There was the Hawaii State Museum was in this building for a while. It was also added to in the 1940s, but before that, in the 1930s, it was the scene of the famous Massey case. This is where the hearings took place. So here's a view over Honolulu in the 1870s. You can see the barracks, which was only built in 1871. Theodore Hook was the architect, and that's in the foreground. You see the old palace, so this is just a few years before Iolani Palace was built. So Iolani Palace would be built in 1874. Thomas Baker, Charles Wall, Isaac Moore are credited with the design. It's often called American Florentine Revival, or American Renaissance Florentine, but I've only heard of it, that term assigned to this building. Never heard it in any other context. And I've looked it up, and there was something called Florentine Revival at the École des Beaux-Arts around that time period, but it applied to sculpture, not to architecture. So I think Geoffrey Fairfax came up with this term, and it stuck. But I would call it Second Empire. So that was based technically. So this is Keoa, built in frank competition with the Iolani Palace by the Princess Ke'e-Likolani. She unfortunately never really lived to enjoy it. It was finished the year in 1883, and she died later that year over in Ulahevi Palace over in Kona. But it was clearly a competition. It would become the Hawaii Honolulu High School for a while, and then later became the site of Central Middle School, which has now changed its name to the Princess Ruth Ke'e-Likolani School. So that's nice. This is a kind of fun story that I think Don put in. So this is the Spreckles Mansion. I don't have any information on who designed it, but it was it got moved to Eisenberg Street at a later period, and it became it's on the site where St. Louis High School still has its alumni club. And this is what it looked like. So when they moved it, they decided to chop off the ground floor and just move the upper two floors, which I thought was a kind of interesting story. This is the Victoria Ward Mansion, built in the late 1880s, supposedly based on memories of what she had back in the American South when she was so it's the Ward Mansion, built in the 1880s, located about where Blaisdell Center is today. This is a kind of advancement on the commercial architecture of the time. This is the Mellis Building. It was the original home of C. Brewer. Okay. How are we doing on time? Are we doing okay? Timekeeper? Okay.
Good.
All right, good. A lot of you are still familiar with Bishop Bank. It's one of the nice pieces along Merchant Street. T.J. Baker was the builder and architect. This was Charles Reed Bishop's the home of the banking establishment he established with W.A. Eldridge. It would kind of become a series of different uses after 1923 when the Bishop Bank moved to Bishop Street. As you remember, Bishop Street was actually constructed at that period. It hadn't been a Bishop Street before. So this is one I was just asking Steve about. This is the Clifton Block, built in 1890, right on Fort Street. And long gone, and I guess a kind of courtyard space now. But this is sort of a typical of the kind of really strongly influenced North American style architecture showing up in Honolulu in the late 19th century. So for many of you who don't know this one, this is actually the Union Church, 1892. It was at the corner of Beretania and Richard Street, and the corner of the lot where the state capitol is now, right across the street from Washington Place. It went out of business as a church. It was a composite church from the Siemens Bethel, another foreigner church that came together. They used to be located off of near Hotel Street before, or near Beretania and Fort Street before, and then they moved here in 1892, built this nice big bluestone or basaltic rocks church. Later got turned into a car dealership. I think they sold Packards there. Don, do you remember? Was it Packards? I think so. And then eventually it was demolished in time to build the Capitol building. This sort of Richardsonian heavy stone construction buildings were very popular throughout Honolulu at that period in the 1890s into the early 1900s. So this is a set of three of them. Bottom left is the C.W. Dickey version of the Beretania and Fort Street firehouse that was later replaced by an Art Deco version that's still there today. The other is a Masonic hall on Alakea, and the other one is the Inner Island building. So the first real skyscraper we would get in Honolulu was the Stangenwald building on Merchant Street. It was the first advertised as a fireproof building in that it had concrete, steel, and brick, and the only wood components were the windows. It was paid for by Hugo Stangenwald, who was a physician, amateur photographer, who had been here since 1853. He had the first electric elevator installed. C.W. Dickey actually was the designer. There's been quite a few alterations. There used to be more kind of a belvedere on the upper floor that's now been kind of obscured, but it was redone in the 1980s. Kind of tragic loss, the Alexander Young Hotel. It lasted until 1981 when it was torn down. George Percy was the architect right on Bishop Street. Interestingly, Walter Emery, this was one of his first jobs, was supervising the construction of this in 1903. Had a lot of shops along the ground floor, and the roof garden was a very important feature of life in downtown Honolulu. This is before you had a big development of hotels in Waikiki, so this is where the best of the best stayed, right, when they came to town. If you're a fan of Earl Derbiggers and the Charlie Chan stories, he spent some time at the Alexander Young Hotel. Hackfeld Company. If anybody's been to AIA lately, you'll see the model that was done by Bishop Museum. And they gave it to me, and I couldn't use it. I had put it in the lobby of the architecture school for a little while, and some of the people said, well, that's not the kind of buildings we design here. And I said, I know, it's not meant to be that, but it was such a nice artifact. And we brought it down for an exhibit on Fort Street, and they seemed to like it at AIA, so I guess it's now theirs. It was going to go just get dumped, but it was built in 1902. Oliver Trapphagen was the architect, very Beaux-Arts style building with a big domed entry area, beautiful lobby. It later became headquarters for AMFAC after Hackfeld was taken over during World War I when German property was seized. So it became AMFAC, which in turn was Liberty House and a lot of other things that we may remember. The brewery on Queen Street, the Royal Brewery. The architect was actually a guy named Herman Steinman, and it was the Honolulu Malt and Brew Company. That actually was where they made Primo beer beginning in 1901. It fell on hard times, and was sort of out of business during Prohibition, and then came back into business, kept operating until 1962, then lay fallow for many years, and then in 1996 it was finally rehabbed as a subsidized housing. So this was the Honolulu Bank of the Bishop Company that became known ultimately as the Samuel Damon Building, after Samuel Damon, who bought out Bishop in the end. He'd been working for Bishop Bank for a long time. This was built in 1922. It's now the site of the First Hawaiian Center, and that was a big controversy when it was taken down in 1993. Had a big impact on the Historic Hawaii Foundation at the time. You had people who were very upset that they didn't fight harder to keep the Damon Building. A lot of people would come up to me and say things like, it's not even really stone. This is a terracotta building with a steel frame. And we have a lot of them everywhere. I'd always say, yeah, we don't have any like that here. So it's one of our last great neoclassical banking houses. So here we had a whole bunch of neoclassical buildings in the beginning of the territorial period. So we've got Hawaii Hall at UH, 1912, Ripley and Reynolds. We got the State Library, which is a Carnegie Library designed by Henry Whitfield, who was Carnegie's son-in-law. He got a lot of commissions for libraries. And then the Archive Building, which was taken in a very different guise. And then some other building that Don wasn't able to tell me.
Kauai County Building.
Okay, the Kauai County Building. Thank you. So that was, but then quite quickly in the late teens and 20s, a new style started to take off, which was the Spanish Colonial Revival, Mission Revival it's sometimes called, Mediterranean Revival, kind of they're all kinship. Bertram Goodhue came out in 1917 at the invitation of Oahu College to consider building a theater, which he did, but also to do a master plan. He presented this to the local Chamber of Commerce and other people that were interested and said, we should look like Acapulco. We really need to move into Spanish colonials. They got the same climate, and this would be a great theme. He had just finished with the Panama, California exposition in San Diego. Part one of the thing is still there in Balboa Park. Most of it was at that site, like many of the expositions, was made out of lath and plaster. But that really helped to popularize this, and the building of the Panama Canal had a big part of it. Anyway, they would, these were both conceptual plans, so Goodhue ended up getting ultimately got a commission to work on the Honolulu Academy of Arts, but other architects came in and worked as well. So York and Sawyer did the David Kalakaua building, which was then the federal courthouse and post office, built in 1922 in the Mission Revival style, sold off in 2003. There's also Hawaiian Electric, which was also York and Sawyer, a little later, 1927 on Richard Street. And then, of course, most famously, the view on the bottom left is the pool at the Laniakea, the Richard Street YWCA. by Julia Morgan, who had this close connection to the Atherton family, and so she had come out earlier, but she wasn't here to supervise the actual work on the building. So there are many others. There's the old Honolulu police station. Some of you may have been around long enough to know this is where you went to pay your traffic fines at one point. They had traffic court here, but after it had been a police station, it's where they keep a lot of the records in the basement that people like Don and I use. 1931, Louis Davis. Let's see, when Earl Rodriguez goes down to the police station in the first Charlie Chan novel, this is not the station, it hadn't been built yet. So he would have gone to the old police station dating to 1886. Another is McKinley High School, originally Honolulu High School. Louis Davis again. Some later additions, actually by Vladimir Osipov to the building. And then St. Patrick's Church up on Waialae Avenue is another. Ralph Fishburne and H.L. Kerr did the school. Fishburne did the chapel. So this is one of many people's favorite buildings, older buildings in Honolulu. It's the Honolulu Academy of Art. Anna Rice Cook was the founder of it. She had a personal vision, and she was the wife of Charles Montague Cook. 1922, she founded it. She donated the site of her Queen Anne style wood house. There's a picture of it there in the entrance. It would get finished only in 1927. Bertram Goodhue was the architect, though he died in 1924. He was, I think, only in his 50s. And Hardy Phillip was an architect who had worked on Seabrewer and other places. He would end up taking over completion of it. Mrs. Cook had an influence. You look at this picture on the bottom that shows a very sort of straight roof, and Mrs. Cook thought that it needed to have this bell cast roof, a little bend in the roof, which was inspired by buildings like the one on the upper right. I forgot to ask you, Don, which is that?
The Judd family's house.
On the upper right?
No, the,
Huh?
Ko'olauloa.
Koloa Church?
No, a house, it was just.
It's a house. Anyway, there was also Kanikapili Church, originally had this kind of roof. Waioli over in Kauai had this type of roof. So he and other architects of this Hawaiian regionalist movement were familiar with the double pitch roof. And he didn't design the Honolulu Academy of Arts, but Mrs. Cook had a role. There was going to be a Chinese tower in the Chinese courtyard, and she nixed that. And she had a number of influences on the final design, but this was his original rendering on the bottom. So one of our great regionalists, Hart Wood, would design the, gotta go back. The old school Punahou is not designed at this time. It dates to the 1851 or to the early 1850s. And that was another of the pieces of inspiration for the building, with the stuccoed walls. Okay. Chinese Christian Church, or First Church of Christ the Scientist. Hart Wood was the designer. He had done something very similar in Lehue, in Maui, in Kauai. He was trying to develop a kind of local vocabulary, so he had this kind of rusticated basalt with these broad kind of horizontal bands. A little sense of Tudor to it. It's got what's called perpendicular period or Tudor period arch over the entrance. And this was built in 1923. This is one of the original cottages at the Halekulani Hotel. It was owned by Juliet and Clifford Kimball. They began the hotel in 1917 and became very attractive to people coming from elsewhere. And back to Charlie Chan, the first story takes place when this is all there was to the hotel. A number of these little cottages, and one was the house without a key, which was the bar, in which you could go in and make your own drink. let's see, 32, C.W. Dickey was hired to create the Central Pavilion. And that's still there when you go. Much altered through renovation, but that's still the core of the 1984 rebuilt Holly Kalani. So particularly Hart Wood, he would experiment with a number of different exotic styles. So he did the Gumps building on the left in Waikiki, right on Kalakaua Avenue. And he also would design the first Chinese Church of Christ in 1929, where he tried to meld this kind of tastes of ancient Chinese architectural forms with a modern Christian church. And I think he did it quite successfully. I remember looking at Shangri-La, and I don't know if you know it, if any of you have been to Shangri-La, but the camels outside of the main entrance she bought from Gumps. They were displayed at Gumps, and she said, "I'd like those," and she put them there. They weren't imported from some exotic place. The Gumps had imported them. In the old days, they would do a kind of question architects in Hawaii, what's your favorite building? And if it wasn't the Honolulu Museum of Art, it would be Alexander and Baldwin. This was a collaboration between C.W. Dickey and Hart Wood. It brings in a lot of really interesting motifs. The cattle head, which is suggestive of ancient times, but also suggestive of the origin of their wealth. The reeded columns that look like sugarcane stalks, and the capitals which look like the top of good sugarcane. All of these, and then mixed with sort of Chinese motifs. But on top of that, you've got this double pitched roof on the top in tile, and this is really one of the great signature pieces of the Hawaii regionalist movement in the territorial period, 1929. Dickey would also, just a couple years later, finish the Immigration Building, which is right around the corner from here, hidden from view behind walls. I remember when my wife needed to get something for immigration, I stupidly thought you went to the Immigration Building, but nobody's actually there, or if they're working there, they don't have an outlet to actually help you in any way. So I thought that was interesting. So this is a traditional Shinto-style shrine, Izuma Taisha, and it was designed by one of Honolulu's first Japanese architects, Heigo Fuchino, and he did this in the, I guess, the 1930s, perhaps, Don, you think?
23.
Huh?
1923.
23, thanks. He would also design the Makiki Christian Church, and this is really based on Kochi Castle in Kochi Prefecture, which is where the minister Takia Okamura came from. So it mimics the castle that was in the prefecture. Oddly enough, you think this is something exotic, but it was actually done by Emery and Webb. Which was the Hongpa Hongmonji mission. There was a movement among Japanese at the time to try to create a tie to the roots of Buddhism. So the idea was you would incorporate Indian forms along with some Japanese forms, along with some Western forms. It would later get added to an altar, particularly in the 1940s and again in the late 50s. But it still retains a lot of it. This is just a tragedy that we lost this, the Waikiki Theater. I don't know how many of you out there remember Waikiki Theater, but this was a wonderful piece by C.W. Dickey, 1936. It followed, did I lose my mic here?
You're back.
We there? Okay. It followed all the conventions. They always had kind of two wings coming forward. They would hold the concession stand, and usually it'd be a barber shop. I always think when you go to Ward, there's that barber shop there, and I think, wow, that's so much in the tradition of Hawaii. But he often had a fountain feature or something. He did that at the the one on River Street, what's the name of the one on River Street?
Toyo.
Toyo Theater also had a water feature and had these extending wings. And even the University Theater, the Varsity Theater on University Avenue had that kind of arrangement where you got your concessions outside at one point and things. This went down and it was so sad, piece by piece. They took out the interior, some of the interior. It was an atmospheric theater, so you could see the stars at night, and when the movie was getting ready to start, the clouds would sort of fade and the sky would turn black, and it was very popular with local people. They would hire mainly local Japanese and Chinese girls to work as usherettes. They had little hats like bellmen wear, and they would find your seat for you, and it was very prestigious. It was like one step shy of getting a job on Pan Am, right? To be an usherette at the Waikiki Theater. So there's just a little hint, and I hope none of the architects out there were part of it, because I'm not speaking too highly of the little shopping center there's now there that gives a little nod to what was once there. But it was great. Had this beautiful organ, and they would play before it. Okay, Don had a number of different of the pumping stations, so this is just one of the pumping stations. This was the Pacific Heights, Frederick Ort. Others were designed by Hartwood and other architects. And this is the Seaside Apartments, 1936. So you can see how they were kind of translating this territorial style into building type that became ubiquitous in the post-war periods, the walk-up apartment that got their start in the 1930s. So post-war, you started getting high-rises for the first time. They say part of it was they realized you didn't have to limit the height of a building to the height of the largest ladder in the fire department. There were other ways to control fire. So this is Queen Emma Gardens, Minoru Yamasaki. He did 1350 along on Nimitz Highway on Moana Boulevard as well. They both painted them. The colors are comparable now, gold. Apparently that was the original color. And the really interesting little concrete awnings that provide shade. And their design is designed for environment, to address the issues of environment. A lot of them don't have air conditioning. There are 3 towers, a large big space, but of course it was part of the Chinatown renewal project, so that cleared out a lot of housing that was there before. Don kindly includes the Marco Polo, because that's where I live, and I keep trying to get it included in all our books. But it is interesting. Its lead architect was Charles Ty Sutton, but it also had Lamone, Freeth, Haynes, Jones, and Farrell were also there. These are all guys that have been working on the state capitol. And when it got done, a lot of them wanted to stay, so this is one of the projects. So this is kind of like Burle Marx or something in Rio de Janeiro on the sidewalk. They called it the double hula design, and so they wanted something more distinctive and interesting. And I see the Ritz-Carlton kind of mimics it a little, so they're obviously trying to catch up with us. Holly Manoa, one of the great buildings, very Corbusier like the Marseille block. And IMP was the designer, but Clifford Young, local Chinese guy, did a lot of on-the-ground work for IMP. Young and Henderson was the firm he had, and he did all the buildings at East West Center. Okay, Hawaii State Capitol, going back a little in time, this is Bell, Lamone, and Lowe. John Carl Warnecke was had oversight over it. Finished in 1969. I noticed there's water all around it, and so sorry we're losing that feature. We'll see how it turns out. So a great example of a sort of mixture of formalism and brutalism, I would say. Almost done here. Alfred Price, First Methodist Church, First United Methodist Church. Again, an effort to kind of use concrete with stones that kind of give it a sense of local presence. It was built on a lot where the Admiral Thomas Hotel is. Condo is right behind it. So they own the lease still, the ground on all of those apartments still. So there's an interior view. Originally completely open to the weather on the sides, but then there's now netting in the windows because they found that the birds kind of flew in a lot and caused disruption on the interior. A much-loved building, the Thurston Chapel at Punahou. Vladimir Osipov, 500 seat. It's built right near springs on Punahou. A little bit of a conservation issue problem. You can see on the left, there's always kind of rising damp because the wall of the building sits directly adjacent to the pond. But it's a beautiful building. If any of you have not been there, try to go to something there. It's one of Osipov's great creations. So we're ending up with buildings that kind of suggest a return somehow to our original buildings. And this is the chapel at Kamehameha School, the Bishop Memorial Chapel. It's designed in 1988 by Dwight Kwaikala and Dan Chun. Got a lot of recognition because you can see they're really trying to tie back to the traditions of Hawaiian construction, which has always been hard. And then they did the same thing at the Hawaii School of Knowledge, the Hawaii Nuakea School of Knowledge at UH. 2007, Dan Chun, I think, won the gold medal from the local chapter of AIA last year, or 2 years ago. Again, a heroic effort to kind of somehow give a nod to traditional Hawaiian architecture. You can see in this picture that the roof structures are still kind of greenish looking, and they were supposed to turn green, but Hawaii has this horrible record with metal, and it often doesn't behave the same way here as it behaves elsewhere. Think of the stadium, right? So this also doesn't turn green, and they painted it green one time and it didn't last, so it's more of a dark bronze color still, with streaks of green. So that's one of the kind of problems with using a green roof. So I hope that was an adequate run through all of Hawaii's history, and I hope I got somewhere within my time.